Welcome to Journeys Through Sociology. I'm Lale Bebahanyan, and I'll be your host for this series of interviews sponsored by the ISA, the International Sociological Association. Journeys Through Sociology is a series of interviews with the 22 members of the Executive Committee of the ISA that aims to give viewers a sense of how these various scholars approach their work as sociologists. We'll be discussing some of the sociological endeavors they're currently engaged in, some of the factors that initially drew them to sociology, and some of the challenges that they faced along the way. So each week we'll be posting another interview with a different executive committee member where they'll share their thoughts with us on their own journey through sociology. Now, the ISA Executive Committee is strewn throughout the world, residing in different nations throughout the world, reflecting the diversity of the ISA itself, which draws its membership from 167 different countries. Our hope is that these interviews reflect that diversity and together give us a sense of the kinds of possibilities but also challenges facing sociologists throughout the world. And today, we launch this series of interviews with Dr. Michael Burawoy, who is currently the president of the ISA. Dr. Burawoy is a professor of sociology at the University of California, Berkeley, where he's now been teaching for 35 years. And although he was originally trained as a mathematician, he went on to receive an MA in sociology at the University of Zambia, and later a PhD in sociology at the University of Chicago. And he is perhaps best known for his ethnographic work on labor and the politics of production in industrial workplaces. His earliest project involved doing participant observation in the copper mines in Zambia, where he studied the organization of labor in the post-colonial era. He then moved on to Chicago, where he worked as a machine operator in a factory and studied the ways in which consent was produced among workers on the factory floor, becoming the basis of his book, Manufacturing Consent. He then became interested in the organization of production under socialism, and he went to Hungary, where he worked as a furnaceman in the steel mills in the 1980s. But while Dr. Burawoy was working away in the steel mills, state socialism in Hungary crumbled, and that led him to Russia, where he again engaged in ethnographic fieldwork in a factory, this time to be interrupted by the collapse of the Soviet Union. And throughout all of this work, Dr. Burawoy has particularly emphasized the importance of ethnography as a way of illuminating the standpoint of the working class, a kind of bottom-up view to the politics of production. And aside from this extensive work on labor, he's also spent many years nurturing the development of what he calls public sociology, sociology that is engaged with and informed by publics. And in his role as president of the American Sociological Association, he did quite a bit of work developing public sociology. And now, as the current president of the ISA, he's also launched a number of exciting projects that hopefully he'll discuss with us today. So Dr. Burawoy, thank you so much for being with us today.
My pleasure, my pleasure. Yes.
So actually, I would like to begin today by asking you to just share a little bit about some of the projects that you've been working on as president of the ISA.
Yes, no, I would be delighted to do just that. Yes, no, I think when I became president, one of my agendas was to try and include the excluded. You know, so many sociologists around the world can't afford to go to Gothenburg, to Yokohama, to our congresses, to our forums. And so I thought it would be good for us to sort of try and exploit digital media to get at populations of sociologists that are perhaps more rooted in specific locales. Perhaps also sociologists who are sort of not linked into a community of sociologists. So with that in mind, we in the ISA developed a number of different projects. The first was actually to develop a newsletter. Amazingly, the ISA really didn't have a newsletter. Its research committees did and do, but the ISA itself did not. So we launched this global dialogue, as we call it. And I had in mind something relatively sort of modest, 3 or 4 pages every few months. But it has turned out to be a major project. And it's actually more than a newsletter. It's like a review. It comes out 5 times a year. And originally I thought perhaps if we're very lucky, we could get it in 3 languages. People said that would be very difficult. But actually, at this point in time, we have it in 11 languages. And it's just been an amazing collaborative effort across the world, joining teams of young sociologists together in this translation. So that's global dialogue. The second project was something I began a year and a half ago, and that was called Universities in Crisis. You know, in most places in the world today, universities are indeed in crisis. I think the exceptions may be China, perhaps Brazil, perhaps Taiwan, but most places, Europe, North America, most of Latin America, Asia, universities are indeed in crisis, subject to a pincer movement of regulation on the one side and commercialization on the other. So we have set up this blog to actually sort of give an assessment of these different situations of crisis. I think it's important that we as sociologists sort of examine the sort of workplace where we ourselves work and to understand the limits and possibilities of that workplace and the directions of change. I guess the third, perhaps, and you know yourself, we did this together, the third project, again, there's something I really hadn't a clue about before I began it, called Global Sociology Live. This was an endeavor to bring sociologists from around the world into a conversation with students at Berkeley. The sociologists would be Skyped in or video conferenced in, and there would be a discussion. And then the whole thing would be itself broadcast on YouTube with the help of the Berkeley ETS team. And it turned out, again, to be a really fantastic success that we did last semester. We'd done this course that we taught on global sociology, which sort of had a rhythm of its own and indeed did bring in many people from different places in the world. And next semester, we're hoping to try and do this again in an even more ambitious form called Public Sociology Live. So I guess that's the third, and I suppose the other fourth moment of digital world is precisely what we're doing here today. I was so impressed with the executive committee of the ISA, the people elected by the members of the ISA to run the ISA, that I thought it would be really nice if the members really knew who is in fact leading the association and the very distinctive and interesting backgrounds from which they come. And so that's the point of these journeys through sociology, as you call them, to bring to display the diversity and richness of the sociologists that are running the ISA today, perhaps reflective of the breadth and depth of sociology in different parts of the world. Yeah. So I guess that is what I'm really excited about in my role as president of the ISA. Yeah.
So if perhaps actually we could switch gears a little bit now, and I'd like to ask you a question that we're going to in fact pose to all of the interviewees, which is, could you share with us 3 factors that kind of initially drew you to sociology?
Just 3, you say, huh?
That's our limit, yes.
That's our limit. You have to be very careful in what you say and what you choose. It's so difficult to know exactly what leads one to be a sociologist. One can go back into one's family history, but I actually want to start rather late in my life. Well, not that late. So I think the first factor I would like to stress was my own sort of migration. I was brought up in Manchester, England, in a relatively sheltered middle-class home of sort of immigrant parents, actually. And between school and university, I decided, for reasons that are not exactly clear to me, to make a trip to the United States of America. I had 6 months to spare, and somehow I thought, well, that would be an interesting thing to do. Nobody else was dreaming of that. In fact, when my friends heard about this, it was a sort of betrayal. Going to the United States was seen in that time to be a betrayal. This crass commercial place. But very few people actually had visited. This was a 65. It was difficult to go to the United States. In fact, I went there on a Norwegian cargo boat that took about 15 days. That was the cheapest way I could go. But anyway, there was that experience of 6 months and 5 months, 6 months in the United States, 3 months in New York. I mean, it was traumatic experience, overpowering experience of, going to this amazing city, the likes of which I had never seen before. Yeah, it was a very intimidating. I don't think I opened my mouth for 3 months. I mean, it was such an intimidating experience. And then I was a camp counselor, sort of thing that students do in the United States. And I got fired from the camp. We won't talk about that. And then I traveled around the U.S. It was a time of civil rights movement was emerging, anti-war movement. This was a very exciting and optimistic period in U.S. history, which really influenced my own vision and made it very difficult for me to return to England, particularly to Cambridge, which is a sort of parasitic and sort of very detached place, a sort of paradise on earth, you might say. But it really was so detached. And when I returned there, as I found it when I returned in 1965, to be this mathematician, yeah. So that, I think, is my first.
Well, what would you say? What was it about those experiences in the U.S. that drew you to sociology in particular, to thinking sociologically?
Well, I guess it was just the existence of the idea that societies can be different was so powerfully present. Yeah, the language was the same, but Britain and the United States couldn't be more different. And of course, the idea of social movements. I mean, and I became very interested in the student movement. That social movements can actually change the world, as I thought at that time. I think those were two factors that perhaps subliminally were affecting my sort of embryonic sociological consciousness. Yeah.
And so you still have two more out of your three.
Two more. Okay, two more. All right. Well, I went Cambridge. I want to stick with Cambridge. Yeah, Cambridge. I hated Cambridge. The most miserable years of my life. Part because I was doing mathematics and I couldn't find anything else to do. Economics seemed even more boring, and sociology didn't exist. So what I did was try and escape for as long as I possibly could. And in Cambridge, you had these 4 months vacation, summer vacation, and I used to go every vacation to do a different part of the world. At the end of the first, I went to Africa, and I don't want to say anything about that just at this point. What I want to stress is the end of my second year in 1967, summer of 67, I went to India. Again, very interested in the role of education and its potentiality, its potential transformative role. I was interested in a question that, I picked up from some Fabian pamphlet about the medium of instruction in university education. So I thought I would go to India and investigate this matter. I mean, I was only 18 or 19 and, absurdly naive about everything and young. But anyway, off I went. Now, this was another amazing experience for me. I'd never been in a society where it was so densely populated, where rich and poor were shoulder to shoulder, where different layers of civilization were ever present actually on the streets. This was an amazing sight. I think it sort of affects anybody who goes there who's never been there. But it was not so much the society itself I want to stress in terms of it shaping my sociology. It was the project. Which language was my question? Which language should students in the universities learn through? Which language? Should it be the national language, Hindi, one of the regional languages, of which there were, I think, 18 at the time, or should it be English, which was the language of the elite? And I thought this was a technical question, so I went round the country, essentially examining students, seeing in which language they performed better. Is it English or Hindi or the regional language? And so I would come up with an answer, and that would be the solution. Did I learn a lot in those 3 months in India. What I learned was that the medium of instruction in university education was not a educational issue at all. But it was in part a technical issue, but it was largely a political issue, as anybody who has ever lived in India knows only too well. But this was a political and social issue around which people struggled, that language was a terrain of political struggle, controlling people's access to resources to different classes. That's, in my view, where I learned to be a sociologist. The direct experience of realizing that this was not a technical educational problem, but it had to be understood in its social, political, and economic context. I think this was, for me, a real revelation from which I never recovered. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, well, that's my second. Now you want my third, I guess.
I'd love your third, yes.
Okay, yes. All right, my third. Well, look, yeah. I guess my third was really when I became officially a sociologist, i.e. pursued a sociological degree. And that was in Zambia. As I said, I really couldn't stand, it was 1968 when I graduated from Cambridge with this maths degree. The last thing I wanted to do was to stay in England, boring England. And so I went back to Africa. I'd been there in 1966 in my summer vacation. I went back to South Africa. I became a journalist. Had no right to be a journalist since I barely wrote and spoke. Well, I spoke English, but I was not trained. My English was pretty poor. But anyway, because I had a white skin, and this was South Africa, I was able to get a job as a journalist on a magazine called News Check. It was like sort of it was like Business Week of South Africa. And I was a correspondent for foreign affairs. Anyway, I did this for several months. And really, South Africa was in a very repressive period, very gloomy period politically. And so I abandoned South Africa, went to Zambia. And it was in Zambia this was 1968, the end of 68. This was 4 years after independence. I went there with a view, actually, to once more seeking out students who might be potential play a potentially sort of transformative role in Zambian society. Yes. Well, anyway, I had to survive. So the people I knew, they suggested I get a job on the Copper Belt. I managed to get a job on the Copper because I knew some executive in Anglo American, one of the biggest mining corporations in Africa. And it was there that I sort of began my first real genuine field work in sociology, studying. Well, they didn't know what I was studying. I kept this a secret, but I was actually studying the changes in the racial order in the copper mines. So 50,000 employees. It had been a color bar society, white over black. What happened to the color bar in post-colonial Zambia? Well, what I was observing everywhere, I went, and as I did my field work and as I collected data, because I was very well placed to collect data in this personnel research unit where I was employed, I discovered, but I discovered that the color bar was being maintained. It was like a floating color bar. The color bar floated up, but it was still a color bar. It was still white over black. And that was my sort of first piece of research, and I think probably my best piece of research, studying the actual reproduction, the maintenance, persistence of the racial or the colonial racial order into the post-colonial period, and asking why. Why, given that the United National Independence Party UNIP's whole project was to dismantle the racial order, why was it sustained in the copper industry of all places? So that is really, I suppose, the third sort of major influence. It's there as I became a sociologist, and I went to the University of Zambia to actually study sociology for the first time in my life, and got my MA in sociology and social anthropology there in university. Yes, I suppose that's my third factor, the experience in Zambia. That was transformative. Yes.
Those three stories of the U.S., India, and Zambia, actually, they give us a very kind of fascinating glimpse into what drew you to sociology, what kind of got your sociological imagination flowing. But I'd also like to pose another question that we'll be posing to all the interviewees as well. So in your trajectory as a sociologist, can you share with us what you feel are maybe three of the challenges you faced in doing sociology?
Tell me, Lali, how much time do we have left? Do you know?
We have about 10 minutes. So
10 minutes, okay.